Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another exciting class on Enoch. This time not on the Book of Enoch, First Enoch, but we're moving ahead and we're going to what's called Third Enoch or Sefer Hekhalot, right, which is an interpretation of Enoch that's considered part of the Hekhalot literature, which is kind of mystical. These are kind of mystical, we could say early Kabbalistic texts that deal with what exists in the angelic realm. Okay. And in these texts, what we see is that Enoch, this is where we see the whole story of Enoch becoming Metatron. Now, this is not something that we saw in earlier Enochic literature. Remember, we were looking at First Enoch, which is composed of several works, all of them, except perhaps for the parables of Enoch, all of them composed during the Second Temple period by Jews, right? And then we had parables of Enoch, which is possibly Christian and therefore a little later. So we will see some certain parallels to the parables of Enoch, actually. And we're going to see things that we don't see in this earlier Enochic literature. And the question becomes, so where is this influenced from? I'm going to say right now that there were, from the beginning, so the Third Enoch or Sefer Hekhalot was published in its entirety only in 1928. That's that book that I sent you, those who are on the email list. And it was based on manuscripts mainly manuscripts in the Bodleian, but also other manuscripts that were put together by Hugo Odeberg. And we're going to be using his text to both for Hebrew and English in this class. So I want to say a little bit about dating. So Gretz dated this as late as, and this was before they, of course, had the Qumran fragments. So there was an argument of how Jewish is First Enoch, right? So once you have Qumran fragments that are parallel to most of the books of First Enoch, you can say, well, these works seem to be Jewish. But before you found those Qumran fragments, you couldn't really know for sure. It's pretty hard to know when you have a book that's mainly survived through Christian canons. So once we know now that most of the book of First Enoch was in fact Jewish in origin, we can say, well, this idea of how important Enoch is not completely foreign to Judaism and brought in from elsewhere. Gretz was working probably on the idea that First Enoch was not necessarily Jewish, and he felt that the Hekhalot literature as a whole should only be dated to the Gaonic period, and that it was actually resulting from the importance of Enoch in Islamic literature. That in Islam, Enoch is fairly important, and because of that influenced Gaonic literature. That would put this work to the 800s, right? So you even have, if we're saying, so for example, Sikta Rabati has certain parallels. It's dated to 845 of the Common Era. Just to give you an indication, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer doesn't have that Enoch Metatron connection, and it's from 809 to 813. So it's very possible that these were written fairly late. However, there's absolutely opinions that place these in the 4th or 5th centuries. So considerably earlier than that. And certainly we can say that, given that we know now certainly that there was a lot of importance of Enoch in Jewish literature in general, the question still becomes, well, why would it take so long to kind of come back through? Why this connection to Metatron? We're also going to see certain parallels to Gnostic notions of divinity, etc. So it's a question, right? I would place it relatively late. I mean, compared to Second Temple stuff, like it's not 1st century BCE, it's not 2nd century BCE, it's not 1st century CE, right? It's later than that, right? So, and we are going to see parallels between this and, of course, Chagiga, where we read about Metatron and his important role, somewhat problematic role in heaven. Again, in Talmudic literature, of course, Metatron is not Enoch. And if anything, there are in Talmudic literature, Enoch is not considered necessarily a 100% righteous character. So we don't have, so the question is, why is Enoch the important one? But again, I think we can say that drawing from these traditions of, you want to know what's going on in heaven, right? You want to know who can tell you, who can be the person who makes that leap. Well, in the first one who makes that leap in the Torah is Enoch, who is taken, right? He's gone because God or the angels took him. So he's the kind of window into the heaven. So let's dive into Sefer Hekhalot, or Third Enoch, and you'll see what I mean. I'm going to start from chapter 4. The first couple chapters were added on as kind of an introduction, and I am going to set it all up next to each other so that we can look at the Hebrew and the English at the same time. So what happens is, in the beginning, Rabbi Ishmael has ascended to heaven. Okay, remember, we're reading something that's in the rabbinic tradition. So there's kind of an assumption that, okay, we know who Rabbi Ishmael is. It makes sense that he would ascend to heaven. He ascends to heaven and he meets Metatron. And he asks him, why do you have all these names? Specifically, why are you named Nar? So here it says, I'm looking from verse 2, bet, as we have here. So it's Daled Bet, chapter 4, verse 2. Why in the upper heavens are you called a youth? Meshiva marli mipnei she'af hu Chanoch ben Yared. So now he's going to give the whole story. He's like, I'm called a youth because I am Enoch, the son of Yared. In other words, and what he's going to explain at the end is, because I only became an angel after, as a human being, I am younger than all these other angels that have been around for so long. So they call me youth. Right? Now, what's interesting is that he has a very different explanation. If you remember, I'm going to remind you, in First Enoch, the reason Enoch is taken up to heaven is because the watchers, at least in one of the accounts, it's because the watchers have sinned and they want him to intercede on their behalf. Right? So they're sinning angels and they're asking him to intercede. The story here, that it completely doesn't exist. That story does not exist in this book. Almost. We're going to see hints to it, but it almost doesn't exist, which is interesting because it's such a central story in the Book of Enoch itself, which is another reason to kind of see a real division here between the Second Temple story of Enoch and this later story of Enoch. So he says, I'm going to read it in English just because it's faster. Because I am Enoch, the son of Yared, for when the generation of the flood sinned and were confounded in their deeds, saying unto God, depart from us, for we desire not the knowledge of thy ways, right? As you can see the quote from Eov. Then the Holy One, blessed be he, remove me from their midst to be a witness against them in the high heavens to all the inhabitants of the world, that they may not say the merciful one is cruel. So why is he actually brought up to heaven? It's because, and it's very interesting, because here, I'll look at it in the Hebrew, Shekatu dor hamabul, v'sarchu b'masehem, v'amru le'el sor mimenu, v'dat drachecha lo chafatznu. The whole generation sinned during the flood. As sarchu b'masehem, they completely went off from God. And they said to God, get away from us. We don't want to know your path, like just complete rejection of God. And then Enoch needs to witness this, because people are going to say, what a terrible thing, God. Why did you kill all of them? Okay, people, why'd you kill the animals? So you need Enoch to bear witness. He took Enoch separately. He's like, you bear witness to just how bad these guys are. And yet we don't really see how the animals sinned, right? But that is what he's supposed to say, that he's supposed to bear witness to everyone. Machatu kolotan ha'uklusin. I'm just gonna you'll just follow my follow the cursor. What that whole population sinned. Their wives, their sons, their daughters, their horses, their donkeys, their cattle, their everything they possessed, all the birds that were in the sky, that were in the world, rather. God destroyed them in the waters of the flood. Right. The question is, what did all of these sin? And we don't really get an answer. So the question is, what did the whole population? How did this whole population sin? What did they do? And the answer is, well, my job was to witness that. That was what my job was. My job was to report and be the witness. Right? Right? God raised me up during their lifetime before them to the heavens above to be a witness against them. Okay. So, and then what happens is, and this is also interesting. So we have three angels, Uzzah, Azza, and Azael. I'll show you in the English because it's a little bit easier to follow, I find, in the English. Uzzah, Azza, and Azael. And here on the right, you see the little curvy lines to show you where those names are, right? And where are they coming into the story? They're bringing charges against him. Why are they bringing charges against Hanoch? Because they're like, we said don't create man, right? We said you shouldn't create man to begin with. And then God says, this is what I'm going to do. And then they're like, okay, so why did you bring, as soon as they saw me, they said before him, Lord of the universe, what is this one that he should ascend to the height of heights? Is not he one from among the sons of those who perished in the days of the flood? What does he do in the rakia, in the heavens, right? So they have two arguments. One is, we told God, we told you not to make people at all, which seems to be an argument about during the flood. So, okay, just get rid of all of them. And second, why is this guy who's a person, why is he in the heavens, right? And God says, what are you that you enter and speak in my presence? I delight in this one more than in all of you. And hence he shall be a prince and a ruler over you in the high heavens, right? What prince and ruler is he going to be? He's going to be the angel Metatron, okay? And he says, and because I'm small and a youth among them in days, months, and years, therefore they call me youth now. Remember, this is Metatron speaking, and he's saying, I was Enoch. Now let's point out a couple of interesting parallels here. So if we look at, actually, let me open up Enoch itself here. No, let's go to the Gemara here. So if you have in Yoma, so we're saying, okay, this is interesting. We have these three angels who are again Uzzah, Azza, and Azael, clearly taken from Azazel. But if you remember that Asael is one of the sinning angels in Enoch. Asael specifically teaches forbidden knowledge. That's what Asael's sin is. And here we have in Yoma, Tanu Rabbanan, Azazel, they're all saying, okay, what does Azazel mean in the Yom Kippur story, right? What is Azazel? And we have Tana Deve Rabbi Yishmael. Remember that it's Yishmael who's supposed to be going up to heaven in our story. Tana Deve Rabbi Yishmael, Azazel, Shemechaper al Ma'aseh Uzzah v'Azael. So the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught that Azazel, why is this goat called for Azazel? That it redeems the sin of Uzzah and Azael. Now you can see already in the English, it's adding in, these are the names of the sons of God who sinned with daughters of men. It's doing this because that's in the Rashi. Rashi says this. You know, I'm not going to go into now, but that's what Rashi says. Rashi says, Uzzah and Azael, these are the angels that sinned with the daughters of men in Genesis 6:2. In other words, these are the sinning watchers from Enoch, is what Rashi says. But that's not what's in this text. All we know is Uzzah and Azael sinned, right? So what we could say is, in this text that we're looking at with third Enoch, what Uzzah and Azael, what is their sin? Their sin was starting up with Enoch and possibly also saying that all humans should be destroyed. And that might be their sin, Okay, it's interesting because again, once more, we're taking Uzzah, Asa, and Azael, and we're changing them from the Book of Enoch, which is again a disconnect. This is disconnected from the way Jews talked about Enoch in the Second Temple period. It's a new story about Enoch, and it's a new story that very much ignores this earlier story based on the Watchers, which was actually very, very popular in the Second Temple period, as we're going to be discussing in our next class. So moving right along. So here we have, so this is Metatron. Metatron is super important, and we're going to see a parallel to this in 30 Enoch, but let's go into where we know where Metatron, of course, figures very prominently is in Chagiga. I'm reading in the Talmud Bavli, Chagiga, Tet Vav, Amud Aleph. And it's the story of the 4 people who went Machorei Pargod, behind the curtain, right, into the mystical world of heaven, into the, where they really kind of shouldn't have gone, and the problem of going into that area. And Pargod, of course, being from a Persian word, which was used for the curtain that would separate the king, right, and his courtiers, right? And they go behind the curtain into the presence of the king, as it were, right? So it starts with saying this is what happened to the 4 of them, and what happens to Acher, Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya. Acher kitzetz benitiyot. Acher cut down the saplings. What does that mean? He cut down the saplings. It means he went off, right? It means he became he doubted God, became not religious, and became a non-believer. Alav hakatuv omer al titen et picha lachati et bisarach. Over on him, the verse says, "Don't let your mouth make your flesh sin or mislead your flesh." Mighty, okay. What happened? Chazar Metatron, the it yehiva le rishuta lemetav lemichtav zachvotat Israel. And he said he saw Metatron, who had been given permission to sit. Angels are not supposed to sit in the heavenly presence. No one's supposed to sit in the heavenly presence. And here's Metatron sitting, right? And he's writing the merits of Israel. So there are 2 problems here. One is that he's sitting, and the other is that he seems to be sitting in judgment. He's taking a role that's supposed to be God's. Amar. Gmiri dilmala laheve lo yeshiva velo tacharut. He says there should be in heaven, there's not supposed to be any sitting and any competition, or perhaps any hierarchy. Velo oref, velo ipu. You can't turn your back to God, and you can't rest. Shema chas v'shalom shtei rishiyot. But maybe there are 2 authorities. There's not just God's authority, because this is supposed to be God, and Metatron is acting like there is no God above him. Okay. Abkua leMetatron umachyu shitin pulse denura. So Metatron gets punished, right? He gets hit with 60 rods of fire, or burning rods. Amarule. My ta'ama ki chazite lakalt mikame. Why did you let him see this? Why didn't you stand when he was coming to see you? So it hiva le reshuta limchag zachvor the acher. So he got punished, but he still got permission to erase the merits of Acher. Acher being Elisha ben Avuya. Yatzta bat kol v'amra shuvu banim shovavim chutz me Acher. A heavenly voice went out and said, all wayward sons come return except for Acher, right? And then essentially Elisha ben Avuya. There's a whole thing here in the Bavli where Acher says, okay, that's it. I've been punished. That's it. I'm just going to go and do whatever I want. Right. He goes, I always think this is totally, it's funny in this very sad way. What does he do? He goes to a prostitute. She doesn't believe this could possibly be him because he's a rabbi. Right. And he's like, oh yeah. Well, it's Shabbat. I'm going to pull out a radish. That's how evil I am now, right? I am going to uproot a radish on Shabbat. And she's like, wow, now you're Acher, you're another guy because you uprooted a plant on Shabbat. And she's like, okay, I guess the guy I knew is no more. By the way, I always one of the things that I've said numerous times is that it keeps on coming up in the Acher story. It keeps on being a saying, everyone should come back except for Acher. And I say, but the problem is he's not Acher, he's Elisha ben Avuya. If he would just go back to being Elisha ben Avuya, he could come back. As long as he's Acher, he can't. And he loses it in that story, in the Babylonian story. The Yerushalmi story is different, by the way. The Babylonian story, he really loses it when the kid lisps and it sounds like he's talking about Avuya. He says his name. That's when Elisha's like, oh, I almost killed him. Or in another version, he did kill him, right? That it was actually referring to Elisha ben Avuya and not just Acher, this new persona he had created. But regardless, we see, and we're going to see this story kind of brought in also in Sefer Hekhalot in Third Enoch, and that the tremendous ranking kind of Metatron ends up leading Elisha ben Avuya astray. And so he has this tremendous kind of ranking, and according to this book, who is that person? Who is that angel? That angel is Enoch. Now it's very interesting because you would absolutely say someone who had been a human being should not be able to achieve such heights. I think part of the reason you have this equation in this book, Enoch equals Metatron, is to give the reader and the audience the hope that they too can ascend the heights. I'm a human being. That does not mean that I can't reach tremendous heights, because this tremendously high angel himself had been a human being. So moving right along, I'm going to pause. Are there any questions so far?
Pam?
Yes.
Are there theories that this the story in the Talmud is evidence that these traditions that began maybe in First Enoch, elevating Enoch to a very, very high level, they're trying to knock Enoch down back to put him in his place.
Enoch isn't mentioned here, and Metatron, like, so this you could say because the Talmud, when it mentions Enoch, it doesn't make a big deal of him. So I think that absolutely it could be knocking him down to his place, because and you wouldn't want to make it like, let's say there were no first Enoch. Let's say all you had was a verse saying that Enoch was gone because God took him, right? I could totally see why the Talmud would want to say, hey, you know what, he's not such a big deal, because it sounds like he's a big deal, right? Just from that verse, it sounds like he's a big deal. So I could see why the Talmud would be like, okay, we either have to say he's a big deal, or we have to say, no, he was not particularly a big deal. Now, it does say that he was taken. It doesn't say that he wasn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't go into a lot of, like, there aren't these huge passages saying how Enoch isn't worth it, which I would expect if this were a big issue. So and again, I'm a little biased here. I don't see that it was a big deal for the composers of the Talmud. I don't think it was that big a deal, and I think that I mean, I would assume you could, and even, and to me, you might say there was already a tradition in terms of Metatron. Like, what is this story with Metatron? Is he like? So let's say he's not. Let's say Metatron, the name isn't that he's a minor god. The name is just that he's under the throne, right? Yeah, he's under or beyond the throne, right? And he's in the heavenly presence. Okay. So still, I would say that this story absolutely is dealing with this idea that there's an angel that has a lot of power, but is it God? And the answer is no. That was Acher's mistake. Acher's mistake was seeing Metatron and saying, whoa, I can't believe in one God anymore. No, 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 no. There's one God, and that one God gave Metatron permission to sit in front of him. And that one God can punish Metatron in a very unpleasant and embarrassing way by striking him 40 times with fire. I see a comment coming in from Moshe. The story of Enoch's apotheosis to Metatron seems to be almost a direct mirror of the story of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. The latter were corrupt angels who descended to earth, behaved like men, and became mortal. And the former was a mortal man who ascended to heaven because of his righteousness and became an angel, but only in third Enoch. See, this is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that is true in third Enoch. In third Enoch, Enoch becomes Metatron. And it totally ignores the Watcher story. Almost. We'll see, there's a little hint to it, but it completely ignores the Watcher story where those angels decided they were going to be human. It's like that Watcher story doesn't exist. It takes things that are elsewhere used to indicate the Watcher story, and it uses them for other things. So Uzzah, Uzzah, and Azael, they have nothing to do with the Watcher story. Their whole problem is that they're opposing Enoch. They're opposing Enoch. They're opposing people. That's the problem with them. Now we'll see there is a hint to it. So we'll get to that very soon. And in fact, I think I'm going to skip ahead now to specific verses that are interesting. Yes, Cheryl, I see you have a question.
Wait, how many years separates the writing of the Watchers and the writing of Enoch? And of third Enoch.
Of 30. So first Enoch. So first Enoch. We could in what's the section of first Enoch. It's called the Book of the Watchers.
Mm-hmm.
It could be 300 BCE even. It could be it could be quite early. Certainly 250. I would put it, say at least 250, right? 250 BCE. So and now we're talking maybe 400 CE.
That's a long time.
It's a big gap. That's why I do see this as an independent work. In other words, this is not a reinterpretation of first Enoch. That's why originally I wasn't going to teach it, right? Because not only is it very late, it's not a continuation of first Enoch. It's a new work on Enoch. Does it draw from earlier things? Sure, it could absolutely draw from earlier things, but it's not a continuation of the Book of Enoch in any way. It's not like a reinterpretation of the Book of Enoch.
It's almost like your point that Second Temple literature is an interpretation that what we're reading now, Second Temple literature, builds on its biblical counterpart earlier. And so now you have another book that's no longer Second Temple, that's building on Second Temple literature. So we have this kind of
but except that this does. So for example, if it were more aware of the Book of Enoch, I would expect a lot of things about dealing with the Watchers story, things like that. And it's not. It does carry on certain themes in terms of what's in the heavens, like very broad themes. What's in the heavens? Enoch being up in the heavens. But and you'll see that you can make a connection between it and the parables of Enoch, which is possibly that Christian section of the book of First Enoch, because it calls him the chosen one. Here, I'll show you guys that now. All right. And so here, once again, we have Metatron is continuing to tell his story to Ishmael. And he says, when God wanted to lift me up, right, he carried me to the high heavens. And then what happened was the angels, and then they smelled me. Here, I'm reading from the Hebrew now. Mirichin et rechi. The angels could smell. They could smell me, and they say, "What is one born of Mareach Yilod Isha?" Read from the right here. Mareach Yilod Isha. Uma ta'am tipat lavan, shehi ola lamaro. Okay, it says, "What is one born of woman among us? The taste of a white drop," and we know what white drop they're referring to. So they're being insulted, deliberately insulted. What is one born of woman? The taste of a white drop, which comes up to the high heavens. Who is this guy, right? Why should a human be here? And God says, hey, no, since all of the children of men have denied me and my great kingdom and are gone worshiping idols, I have removed my Shekhinah, right, my heavenly presence from among them and lifted it up on high, right? This is because of the flood. This is before the flood. But this one whom I have taken from among them is an elect one among the inhabitants of the world. Elect one, if we look, it's on the right here, Bechir Sheba Olam. Okay, the chosen one in the world. Do we remember? If you remember, the chosen one was what Enoch was called, or the Messiah was called in the parables of Enoch, that Christian section of First Enoch, or possibly Christian section of the Book of Enoch, also called him, or the Messiah, the chosen one. Okay, so here we do see a connection to that idea. Okay, so possibly, because there are different reasons that he could be called the chosen one here. Here, he's not the Messiah, he is an angel, right? And he's being brought up to be an angel. Skipping ahead, and now I'm going to be skipping because it's a relatively long book, and I just want to point out certain things that are interesting. So in chapter 8, we have very repetitive language. Okay. Rabbi Yishmael said, Metatron, the prince of the present, said to me, before he appointed me to attend the throne of glory, the Holy One, blessed be he, opened me to 300,000 gates of understanding, 300,000 gates of subtlety, 300,000 gates of life. That this kind of repetitive language is typical of Hekhalot and also of our prayers sometimes, when you're supposed to be repeating something over and over, and it kind of leads to a rising mood, a feeling of elevation when you're repeating these words over and over and over. If you ever like among Sfaradim, they say this more often, you know, Sharei Binah, they name the gates of understanding. You know, they'll ask God to gift us with gates of understanding, gates of, you know, etc. It's on our prayer as well. And so we can see a parallel here. In chapter 9, we see this very interesting thing where it's talking about how Enoch, when he turns into an angel, he's enlarged tremendously. And I was raised and enlarged the size of the length and width of the world. And he caused 72 wings to grow on me, 36 on each side. And for some reason I'm missing the here. So let's see. Here, so Mitzad Echad, and 36 from the other side, and each side, the wings were filled the world. וקבע בי 365,000 עיניים. I had 365,000 eyes. Each eye was like a planet or a sun. And so he's describing himself as this huge being that fills the world, filled with eyes, filled with glowing eyes, each of which is a planet. This is a little bit, first of all, this is supposed to make you say, wow, angels are amazing. What an amazing world. It also is a little bit reminiscent of another piece of Hekhalot literature, which is called Shiur Koma, which describes God. Describes God almost as a physical anthropomorphic being. Of course, it's a very problematic work that was considered problematic in its time, or at least I shouldn't say in its time, certainly in the time of the Gaonim was considered quite problematic. It was something that the Karaim pointed to as a problem in their arguments with Rav Sadia Gaon. But this is not talking about God, this is talking about an angel, so it doesn't have that same difficulty. And here I'm going to move. So I know I'm skipping around. It's because it's a long book, and I want to showcase certain things. So in chapter 12, verse 5. So now I'm in. I'll flip both of the. It's hard to find the verse number though. Here we are. Dalet Hey. V'karani Hashem hakatan b'fnei chol pamal yeshala. And I was called the lesser God, lesser Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the lesser, again, Yahweh, quote unquote, before all of God's kind of heavenly entourage, Bamarom, and on high. Shenemar kishmi bikirbo, as it is written, because my name is within him. In other words, God's name was within me, so I served as kind of a lesser version of God. Okay. Again, I mean, this is not something we saw anywhere in First Enoch or in Second Temple literature. It would have been considered very, very, very problematic. It works with kind of Gnostic thought that was later, that was in maybe starting, say, the 400s of the Common Era, like in a later period. It would not have been acceptable in Second Temple texts to write such a thing. On the contrary, it was a standard practice to really kind of distance God from, angels were a way to say, oh, we can kind of relate to angels, and angels can relate to God because God is so far from us. Let me and I'm going to skip ahead to the Acher story in Third Enoch. So let's move ahead to chapter 16. So in chapter 16, we have the story of the meeting with Acher, but told from the point of view of Metatron. Okay, so let's just read it in the English for ease. You could look on the right in the Hebrew, if you want. Rabbi Shmuel said, Metatron, the angel, said to me, at first I was sitting upon a great throne at the door of the seventh hall, and I was judging the children of heaven, the household on high, by authorities of the Holy One, blessed be he. The hall, by the way, is the Hechal, right? So when we talk about Sefer Hekhalot, it's these halls of heaven that are described, each with an angel that is in charge of it with a certain hierarchy. And I was judging the children of heaven, the household on high, by authority of the Holy One, blessed be he. And I divided greatness, kingship, dignity, rulership, honor, and praise, and diadem, and crown of glory, to all the, if you look here, Hadar, V'shevach, V'atara, V'keter Kavod, L'chol Sarei Malchuyot, to all the princes of the kingdoms. Princes of the kingdoms, while I was presiding, sitting in the celestial court. So here's Ani Yoshev Ba'yeshiva Shel Mal. Okay, I was sitting in the court above, right? And then what happens? But when Acher, I'm coming back to English here, but when Acher came to behold the vision of the Merkava and fixed his eyes on me, he feared and trembled before me, and his soul was frightened even up to departing from him because of fear, horror, and dread of me, when he beheld me sitting upon a throne like a king, with all the ministering angels standing by me as my servants, and all the princes of kingdoms adorned with crowns surrounding me. In that moment, he opened his mouth and said, indeed, there are two divine powers in heaven. Forthwith, the bat called the divine voice went forth from heaven from before the Shekhinah and said, return, you backsliding children, except for Ach. So here it's very interesting because it's actually a much better explanation of Acher's kind of, I don't know what you would say, the opposite of an epiphany. His crisis of faith makes a lot more sense with this description. Because what he's describing here is an angel seated like a god, right? He's got all of the, here we say, I'm sitting on a throne. I'm not just sitting, I'm sitting on a throne like a king. The angels, the serving angels are serving me. They're standing over me like servants. And all of the kingdom kind of heaven, they're all surrounding me. They're all depending on me. And when Acher sees this, he misunderstands, and he says, Vadai shtei reshuyot b'shamayim. There must be two authorities in heaven. Okay, there must be, because I know God is an authority. This guy, this angel must also be a god, right? And we can understand in this description much better why someone would be so, as opposed to just saying, how could he sit, right? How could he be sitting? How could he be doing what he's doing? Instead, it's really describing something that looks divine, right? And remember that this is after we've been told that God gave him this kind of minor god status, almost, according to this book. So here we have the Achar story told from Metatron's point of view, which is also interesting. And we see, of course, the connection to Chagiga, which is based on which, right? Then you have that question. So are they drawing from the same source, or is one based on the other, right? Now, naturally, it's easy for me to read this as based on Chagiga, right? As opposed to the other way around, because we all know Chagiga almost by heart, that at least that section of Chagiga, we know that section very, very well. It does explain a lot more of what makes Acher much more understandable in terms of his doubting in this story. Okay. And then we have the punishment. Then came Aniel, the prince, the honored, glorified, beloved, wonderful, revered, and fearful one, in commission from the Holy One, blessed be he, and gave me 60 strokes with lashes of fire and made me stand on my feet. Now, to me personally, this reads as based on Chagiga. In other words, you have this punishment. It doesn't sit with the rest of the story or how Metatron has been described, because Metatron hasn't done anything wrong here, right? And in Chagiga, it explains it, and here there's no explanation. It just says, and then I was punished with 60 strokes with lashes of fire, right? And made me stand on my feet. Right. So this is explained in Chagiga, and it makes sense in Chagiga. Here, it doesn't make sense. My understanding is it's here because it has to be here, because this is based on Chagiga. That's the way I see, particularly with the punishment, indicates to me that this is based on Chagiga and not the other way around. Of course, you could also say both of them are drawing from the same story that everyone knows, or that's written in other places, and are putting different spins on it, which is also a possibility. Okay, so there's a lot more that happens. There's a lot more. There's a lot of description here. I'm just going to kind of flip through very quickly in the English. We have kind of a very long angelology, where we hear about all the different angels, what each one does, what each one's in charge of, what they're appointed over the fifth heaven, the fourth heaven, the third heaven, etc. We have, how great they are. We have different things written about the angelic hierarchy. I am going to skip ahead to chapter, but I want to make sure that I didn't miss something that I wanted to point out. Oh, there is something I wanted to point out. Let me move back here for a moment. If you remember, I said that there was a hint of to the Watcher story. That was the story of the sin of the Watchers. That hint is in chapter 5, verse 9. Let us find that now. And here it says, what power was in them that they were able to bring them down? They would not have been able to bring them down. They're talking now about idol worship. They would not have been able to bring them down, but for Uzzah, Azza, and Aziel, who taught them sorceries, whereby they brought them down and made use of them. Each one brought silver, gold, precious stones, and pearls. They erected the idols. They brought down the sun, the moon, the planets, and constellations, and placed them before the idols. How were they able to do this? Because they were taught so by the angels Uzzah, Azza, and Aziel. Again, this is referring to that what we have in Yoma, right? Uzzah, the sin of Uzzah, Azza, and Aziel, right? And Azael. But hold on just a moment, right? Uzzah Azael, the sin of rather Uzzah and Azael. But also, if we look at Enoch, first Enoch, we do have a sin of Shemichaza taught spells and the cutting of roots, and Hermione taught sorcery, there is an idea that part of the sins of the Watchers was not just mating with human women, but also teaching forbidden knowledge. Asael taught men to make swords of iron and weapons. He showed the metals of the earth. And Shemichaza taught spells and the cutting of roots probably for medicine, which was also in this chapter is considered kind of first Enoch, of the Book of Enoch. So this is in the Second Temple period, and this does seem to be, at least to a certain extent, parallel to what you have from here in chapter 5, verse 9 and 30 Enoch. What power was in them? They were able to bring them down, namely the planets. And again, they were talking about, this is also connected to silver and gold and pearls, because that's what they're using to make idols. But they have a kind of a magic. They're able to bring down planets because Uzzah, and Aziel taught them sorceries. Okay, that is a hint, at least, to the sin that we read about in First Enoch. Okay, so I'm going to quickly run through and talk about, yes.
Miriam,
Yes.
going back to the Acher story again about the about the Shtei Rashuyot and Metatron being knocked back down to side. Are there any thoughts about Metatron here serving as some kind of a metaphor for possibly a Jesus figure?
No, I don't think so. No, in the Talmud or here in Third Enoch?
In Third Enoch, or either one,
Well, Talmud certainly not. I would say Talmud certainly not. I think Talmud, they're dealing with the idea that angels do things and not with Jesus, because when the Talmud's talking about Jesus, it makes it pretty clear. Even censored things, you know who it's talking about. And they don't use metaphors. They don't need metaphors for Jesus, right? They can use code words, or they can talk about him pretty much straight out. And here again, it's really drawing from traditions about Metatron, I believe, not about Jesus. Now, you could say that there are parallels in terms of Gnosticism, the idea of a lesser God and a greater God, right? So that in an idea-wise, is you could connect particularly to the way it's described in 30 Enoch, less the Talmud, more 30, because in the Talmud, despite his name, Metatron really operates as an angel, right? Whereas in 30 Enoch, he's really being built up as some kind of lesser, by permission, a lesser god. David, you have a question? Is that why your hand is up?
Yeah, it was sort of a follow-up on that comment. I was actually wondering whether there's any connection between the Metatron story and the Christian story about Lucifer and the fallen
Oh,
angel.
okay. So
and which one occurs first historically?
Oh, okay. So the Lucifer, I think the Lucifer tradition in Christianity is relatively early compared to Metatron if we date it to like 5th century, I believe. I'm not 100% on when the Lucifer story. No, I think the Lucifer story is earlier than that in Christianity, but I don't want to sign on it, right? Metatron doesn't fall here, right? It's super important. I want to let's put some order into things here, okay? Lucifer's an angel that falls, right? And becomes this kind of demonic figure, or not even a demonic figure, because in the beginning, angels rule hell, right? In the earliest Christian recountings of hell, angels are in charge of hell because they've got a job from God and they're angels and they're in charge of hell, right? That's in the earliest kind of versions of Christian hell being taken care of, like they're angels that's their job. And then later on they become demons, kind of in Christian traditions, and certainly in the Eastern tradition at least. And Lucifer, I need to look into when Lucifer as a character kind of happens, because the whole idea of Lucifer is that Lucifer was an angel and fell, right? Now Metatron doesn't fall. That's the whole point here. Metatron's amazing, right? In the Talmud, he's problematic, but it very quickly says, but then he was allowed to take Acher's merits, right? Which you're like, whoa, okay. Like he gets punished, but then gets punished, and maybe he's not allowed to. Like in third Enoch, he's not allowed to sit. He has to stand after. Forever, we don't know. But in the Gemara, it seems like he's going to go back to his job. He just had a punishment for letting Acher see him that way. That was inappropriate, right? And it caused problems. But he doesn't fall. He still has his job. It's interesting in third Enoch, and I don't know because we're at the end of our time. I'm not sure we're gonna. I'm probably just gonna do is give you a summary. In third Enoch, angels actually do get punished. It's interesting that third Enoch, again, very different from what we've seen before in terms of what the job of angels is, how it works. In third Enoch, angels get punished. Guess for what? They don't get punished. They don't mess with human women. I'll tell you that much. Why do angels get punished in third Enoch? And he guesses, I'll tell you why. Because they sing at the wrong time, or they sang the wrong thing, right? That's what angels get punished for in third Enoch. In other words, it's very clear that angels aren't going to fall. They're not going to really sin, right? They're not going to really sin. They can mess up, but they're not going to sin in third Enoch. And in fact, in Jewish tradition, I shouldn't say in Jewish tradition, in first Enoch, in the Book of Enoch, in Second Temple Jewish tradition, angels really mess up, right? And then they get punished forever, and their children become demonic spirits eventually, right? But angels themselves don't become demons. They just get eternal flame. They get horrible punishments. Lucifer falls, and then he becomes this kind of he and his group kind of become the demons of Christianity, the satanic demons of Christianity. It's a very good question in terms of when that story originates from, and I have to look that up. But that's not what happens to Metatron, either in the Talmud or in 30. That's not his role. His role is he's got this super important job that maybe he shouldn't have. And it's interesting in 30 Enoch that he's supposed to originate as a person. So let me I'm just going to summarize then some things that I do want to say. So angels are in fact punished for messing up the singing part, right? They get punishment by that. Punishment because of that. There's a description of saying kadosh, 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 holy, 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 based on Yeshayahu, based on Isaiah. There's a kind of a longer description of that is fairly central also in general to Hekhalot literature, this kind of centering on that angelic prayer, and kind of expanding that and imagining what that looks like. It's interesting in the final chapters, which are possibly added on later. Exactly the date I can't say, but they were probably later than the core of third Enoch. You have the idea that actually this let me open up so we can look at it inside. And also third Enoch, in a way like first Enoch, is made up of different parts. So it's almost certainly a combination. It's almost certainly written by different people at different points, although not necessarily at vastly different times. Now here it's interesting just to see some new kind of theological approaches to various things. One is come, he says to Rabbi Shmuel, he says, come and I will show you where the spirits of the righteous that have been created and have returned, and the spirits of the righteous that have not yet been created and had returned, and they were flying above the throne of glory before the Holy One. Okay, so this is the spirits of the righteous kind of return. They're going to they come back to God, right? And that's what, whereas the spirits of the wicked, we see in chapter 44, the spirits of the wicked and the spirits of the intermediate, the Benonim, right? They are, it's not clear, the spirits of the wicked go down to Sheol. And Sheol here it really is hell. They burn, okay? They go down to Gehenna. Here we are. from the splendor of the Shekhinah, or to cast them down from the presence of the Holy One, and from the splendor of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, to Sheol, to be punished in the fire of Gehenna with staves of burning coal. So here now we have hell. Now we have hell. The wicked is like what we haven't seen so much in the Second Temple, like our classic hell. This is classic hell. The wicked, when they die, they're thrown into the fires of Gehenna and they burn. Okay. And here we have, and then I really wanted to show you, let me see if I'll get to it soon. Chapter 47 we have, and I'm just doing this in English so that this is interesting. In chapter 45, we have the history of mankind up until the Messiah, and if we it's just each person and their generation. It's not super fascinating, but once we get to the Messiah, we have Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And this is very interesting for us, that we have Mashiach, son of Yosef and his generations, and Mashiach, son of David and his generation. The assumption seeming to be that there are two generations, that it's a generational thing, and they don't exist together. First, you have Mashiach, the son of Yosef, and then you have the Mashiach, son of David. And essentially, also, when Messiah comes, pretty much when there are no good people left. It's very much in here in chapter, where are we up to here? So let's move ahead. This is why I'm rushing, because there are many chapters to this thing. Okay. So in chapter 47, we see the punished angels. Okay. Come on, I'll show you the souls of the angels and the spirits of the ministering servants whose bodies have been burnt in the fire of the Makom, the God, right? And whenever the ministering angels utter a song at a wrong time, or as not appointed to be sung, they are burned and consumed. This is what angels get punished for. They get punished for singing at the wrong time or the wrong thing. That's as far as it goes for these angels in 3rd Enoch. They don't sin more than that in general. And in chapter 48, we see, and again, these are probably all these later chapters are probably added on later to the core of 3rd Enoch. We see that that essentially the Messiah comes. Let me find it. In that moment, the right hand of Makom was weeping. The earth is utterly broken. Oops, sorry about that. The earth is utterly broken. The earth is dissolved. The earth shall stagger like a drunken man and shall be moved to and fro like a hut. Essentially, but when the Holy One, blessed be he, sees that there's no righteous man in the generation and no pious man, chassid, on earth, and no justice in the hands of men, there's no man like unto Moshe, and no intercessor as Shmuel, who could pray for God for the salvation and for the deliverance and for his kingdom, that it be revealed in the whole world, for his great right hand, etc., etc. Then God will remember his own justice, favor, mercy, and grace, and he will deliver his great arm by himself. In other words, once there is no one, that's when the Messianic age is going to happen. When there is no more hope, when there are no more good people, that's when essentially the Messiah will come. And I'm just going to point out 2 more things. I know we're over time, but there are numerous interesting things in this book. Let me just move quickly ahead. 48C. In 48C, yes, I want to say, yes, 48C7. Here again, he's called the lesser God. This is Enoch called the lesser God in 48C7. And in 49, we see that one of the things that is answered here. Oh, these are, by the way, numerous names of Metatron. Remember I said there are lots of names of Metatron? Here are 70 names has Metatron, which the Holy One, blessed be he, took from his own name and put upon him. Remember, because the name of God is in me. Here's all these names that Metatron has from God. Again, like God, like how many names does God have, right? So it's a lot like, it's making him almost like a lesser god. There's a verse in which it talks about babies who have died. Dead babies and the righteous are gathered and taught Torah. So babies who have not been able to live, at least in heaven, they continue and they learn Torah. That is, here we are, here it is. If you look here on the screen. And not only that, but Metatron sits 3 hours every day in the high heavens, and he gathers all the souls of those dead who died in their mother's womb, and the sucklings who died in their mother's breast, and the scholars who died over the 5 books of the law. And there was also those who died al Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name, and he brings them under the throne of glory and places them in companies, divisions, and classes around the presence. They have their own little yeshiva by the Shekhinah, and he teaches them the law and the books of wisdom and Agadah and tradition, and finishes their instruction for them because they're babies. They didn't get to learn. So now they will get to learn in heaven. As is written, whom will he teach knowledge, and whom will he make to understand tradition? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast. Little babies are going to be learning Torah in heaven. And one final interesting thing in this final text, Metatron tells, he just paraphrased it. Oh no, it is after the names. Hold on just a moment. Here we are. Okay. And all the treasuries of wisdom are committed in his hand, namely Metatron's hand. And all of them were open to Moses on Sinai, so that he learned them during the 40 days while he was standing. The Torah in the 70 aspects of the 70 tongues, the prophets, the writings, the halachas, the traditions, the haggadahs, the toseftas. Metatron teaches it all to Moshe. But as soon as the 40 days were ended, he forgot all of them in one moment. Then the Holy One, blessed be he, called Yefifyah, the prince of the law, and through him they were given to Moshe as a gift. As it is written, and the Lord gave them unto me. And after that, it remained with him. Then he remembered. And what happens is all the other angels come to him and say, what the heck? Okay, they say, why are you giving this to him? Now I have to find where they say that. Hold on. Here we are. Here. Said Metatron, the angel, the prince of the presence, the angel, the prince of the rulers. Again, it's saying how great he is, right? The God of Israel is my witness in this thing, that when I revealed the secret to Moshe, then all the hosts in every heaven on high raged against me and said to me, why do you reveal the secret to a son of man, born of woman, tainted and unclean, a man of a putrefying drop, the secret by which we're created heaven and earth, the sea and the dry land, the mountains and hills, the rivers and strength? Why are you teaching this guy Torah? All the Torah. Why are you teaching it to him? He's a man, right? He's a man. How can you teach him these things? And it's all the secrets, fowl of the air, the fish of the sea, behemoth and leviathan, and the creeping things, the worms, etc., 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 the dragons, and the Torah and wisdom and knowledge and thought, and the gnosis of things above and the fear of heaven. Why do you reveal this to flesh and blood? Right? I answered them, because the Holy One, blessed be he, has given me authority. And furthermore, I've obtained permission from the high and exalted throne, from which all the explicit names go forth, with lightnings of fire and flaming chashmalim. Okay. And then God has to say, had said to them, no, listen, I absolutely approve this message, and he says, and I delighted and have set my love on and have been trusted and committed unto Metatron, my servant alone, for he is one among all the children of heaven. And Metatron gives the Torah to Moshe, and Moshe gives it to Yoshua to the elders. We have the whole line of Masorah here that we get. Why? Because Metatron has given it to Moshe with the permission of God. So we see just how extreme Third Enoch is in making Metatron, I'm sorry, but godlike. Where Metatron himself is the one who's essentially giving the Torah to Moshe, which is, why exactly would you want to give Metatron all this power? And again, the reason I can think of is if what your goal is to ascend to an angelic status, having someone who says, okay, this is from Enoch. Enoch was human and he ascended to such a high angelic status that he was almost godlike. This is just something that, I mean, I'm reaching a bit, because it's very hard for me to understand why you would want to do this, right? Why a monotheist would want to set up an angel at such a high level. And again, you don't see this in Second Temple literature. I want to emphasize again that what we're reading here is maybe from the 9th century, could be, it's between the 4th and the 9th century, put it that way, okay? Between the 5th, I should say between the 5th and the 9th century CE, right? So it's quite late compared to Second Temple. Second Temple literature would not do something like this because it would be seen as so problematic. Now, you could say, oh, I found something. It would be very unusual. It would be very unusual for a Second Temple work to do this, because it's so, monotheism is so important. In other words, you absolutely do have angels like Michael is given a very prominent status in Second Temple literature. And there's always this kind of tension between the idea that the people of Israel are guided by an angel and the people of Israel are guided by God himself. There's a tension there that continues from biblical texts down through the ages. But the idea that you would set up an angel to actually be, you would emphasize just how powerful this angel is, to that extent is quite unusual. You do have, and I will point out, you do have in Jubilees the idea that the angels of the presence gave Moshe the secret book that had the real story, right? It's not the law, though. It's not the whole Torah. It's Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees says about itself that this is the secret book that the angels gave Moshe at Har Sinai, right? And it's giving you like the real story of what happened in Genesis. But anyway, so we saw a very interesting, a new approach to a lot of different things. We saw, things that we weren't seeing in Second Temple literature. We're seeing a real like classic hell. We're seeing a messianic age with 2 messiahs. We're seeing what we do see are connected. So what absolutely connects this work with Second Temple works is an interest in angelic activity, an interest in heavenly activity, an interest in the hierarchy of heaven and what angels are responsible for, and a belief that angels are responsible for different things on this earth, right? And that absolutely does connect to our Second Temple literature. And the Hekhalot literature as a whole have certain languages, and especially the language of prayer, that is parallel to various works we see in the Second Temple period, particularly in the way it's repeating and in the description of praying with angels. So it's not coming out of nowhere. But in terms of Enoch, we saw that it's kind of ignoring some very central parts of the Enoch story and making them into something else. Thank you, everyone, for joining me, and I'll see you next week.